I've always been fascinated by the audacity of human ambition. Our species, born on a tiny blue marble in the vast expanse of the cosmos, dared to reach for the stars, and not just reach them, but to shape them, to bend them to our will. That's what brought me here, to Helios, our crowning achievement, an artificial planet orbiting an artificial sun. My name is Dr. Ilara Chen, lead astrophysicist on Project Helios. It's the year 2235, and humanity has spread its wings across the Milky Way. But Helios is something else entirely. It's not just a colony or an outpost. It's a testament to human ingenuity, a middle finger to the limitations of nature itself. I remember the day I first set foot on this marvel of engineering. The artificial gravity tugged at my bones, a constant reminder that everything here was crafted by human hands. The air tasted different, recycled and purified 1,000 times over. But it was the sky that truly took my breath away. Our artificial sun, a piece of technology so advanced it bordered on magic, hung there like a fiery jewel. We called it Sol Novus, the new sun. It wasn't as large as Earth's sun, but it burned just as bright, its carefully controlled fusion reactions providing light and warmth to our fledgling world. Quite a sight, isn't it? The voice belonged to Dr. Marcus Roth, my colleague and longtime friend. His weathered face crinkled into a smile as he stood beside me, gazing up at our creation. I nodded, unable to find words adequate to express the mix of awe and pride swelling in my chest. It's beautiful, Marcus. He chuckled, a sound that reminded me of rocks tumbling down a hillside. Beautiful and terrifying. All that power, right there in the sky. Sometimes I wonder if we've gone too far this time, Ilara. I turned to look at him, surprised by the note of doubt in his voice. Marcus had always been the optimist of our team, the one pushing us to reach further, dream bigger. Too far? This is what we've worked for our entire careers. Hell, what humanity has been working towards for centuries. Marcus shrugged, his eyes never leaving the artificial sun. Maybe, but you know what they say about playing God. I laughed, trying to dispel the sudden unease his words had stirred. Come on, Marcus. We're scientists, not theologians. We're not playing God. We're expanding the boundaries of human knowledge and capability. He finally looked at me, his blue eyes serious beneath his bushy grey eyebrows. And what's the difference, really? Before I could formulate a response, a cheerful voice cut through our philosophical moment. There you two are. I've been looking all over for you. Dr. Zara Patel, our resident exobiologist, bounded up to us with all the energy of a new recruit. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her lab coat was wrinkled as if she'd slept in it. Knowing Zara, she probably had. What's got you so excited, Zara? I asked, grateful for the interruption. Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. We've got the first results from the terraforming experiments. The algae samples are showing a 15% increase in growth rate under Sol Novus compared to Earth's sun. Can you believe it? Marcus raised an eyebrow. 15%? That's significant. I nodded, my scientific curiosity piqued. Very significant. Any theories on why? Zara launched into a rapid-fire explanation, her hands gesticulating wildly. Well, we think it might have something to do with the specific wavelengths of light emitted by Sol Novus. There's a slightly higher concentration in the red spectrum, which seems to be boosting photosynthesis rates. But that's just a preliminary hypothesis. We need to run more tests, of course. As Zara spoke, I found my gaze drawn back to the artificial sun. It pulsed gently, a steady rhythm that seemed to match the beating of my own heart. For a moment, I could almost believe it was alive, watching us, listening to our excited chatter about algae and wavelengths. I shook my head, dispelling the fanciful notion. Sol Novus was a machine, nothing more. An incredibly complex, staggeringly powerful machine, but a machine nonetheless. It didn't think, didn't feel, didn't watch. But as we turned to head back to the labs, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back. The success with the algae samples had energized the entire science team, and new experiments were being proposed and implemented at a dizzying pace. We were pushing the boundaries of what we thought possible, and the results were nothing short of miraculous. One particularly memorable day, I found myself in the main hydroponics bay with Zara. The room was a riot of green, plants of all varieties thriving under the carefully calibrated light of Sol Novus. "Look at this, Ilara," Zara exclaimed, holding up a tomato that was easily twice the size of any I'd seen on Earth. "And it's not just the size. The nutrient density is off the charts. We could revolutionize food production across the galaxy with this data." I took the oversized tomato from her, turning it over in my hands. It was firm, the skin a deep, rich red that spoke of perfect ripeness. "It's incredible, Zara. But are we sure it's safe? These growth rates, the increased nutrient density, it almost seems too good to be true." Zara's excitement dimmed a bit at my cautious words. "We've run every test we can think of. No unusual compounds, no signs of genetic instability. It's just better." I nodded, but couldn't quite shake my unease. In my experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. But I didn't want to dampen Zara's enthusiasm further. "Well, keep monitoring, and maybe we should set up some long-term animal trials just to be on the safe side." "Already ahead of you," Zara grinned. "Dr. Yin in zoology is setting up a multi-generational study with mice. We should have preliminary results in a few months." As we continued our tour of the hydroponics bay, my mind wandered back to my conversation with Marcus on that first day. Were we playing God? And if we were, what were the consequences? My musings were interrupted by a commotion near the entrance to the bay. A group of technicians were clustered around one of the light panels, their faces creased with concern. "What's going on?" I asked, approaching the group. One of the techs, a young woman named Aisha, turned to me with a frown. "It's the oddest thing, Dr. Chen. We've been getting strange fluctuations in the light intensity. It's subtle, but it's throwing off our carefully calibrated cycles." I peered at the readout on the panel. Sure enough, there were small but noticeable spikes and dips in the light levels. "How long has this been happening?" Aisha shrugged. "We first noticed it about a week ago. At first, we thought it was just a glitch in the sensors, but it's been persisting. And, well, it's not just here. It's happening all over Helios." A chill ran down my spine. Fluctuations in Sol Novus's output? That shouldn't be possible. The artificial sun was designed to be stable, its fusion reactions carefully controlled to provide consistent light and heat. "Have you reported this to Dr. Roth?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Aisha nodded. "Yes, ma'am. He said he'd look into it, but, well, to be honest, he didn't seem too concerned." I frowned. That didn't sound like Marcus. He was usually the first to investigate any anomaly, no matter how small. "All right, thank you for bringing this to my attention. Keep monitoring the situation and let me know if there are any significant changes." As I walked away, my mind was racing. Something was off with Sol Novus, and Marcus was brushing it off. It didn't add up. I needed to talk to him, to figure out what was really going on. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of our troubles. I found Marcus in his office later that day. The room was a cluttered mess of papers, holographic displays, and half-empty coffee mugs. Marcus himself looked like he hadn't slept in days, his usually neat appearance disheveled. "Marcus," I called softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up from his desk, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Fear. But it was gone so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Ilara," he said, his voice overly casual. "What can I do for you?" I stepped into the office, closing the door behind me. "I heard about the fluctuations in Sol Novus's output. Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus waved a hand dismissively. It's nothing to worry about, just some minor calibration issues. We'll have it sorted out in no time. I frowned. Minor calibration issues. Marcus, this is a star we're talking about. An artificial star that we created to be stable. Any fluctuation, no matter how small, could be catastrophic. He sighed, rubbing his eyes tiredly. I know, but trust me, Alara. It's under control. Under control? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. Marcus, you look like you haven't slept in a week. The technicians are worried. Hell, I'm worried. What aren't you telling me? For a long moment, Marcus was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. Do you remember what I said to you that first day? About playing God? I nodded, a sense of dread building in my stomach. Well, he continued, I think we might be about to find out what happens when the game goes wrong. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus stood up, walked to the window that looked out over the Helios landscape. Sol Novus hung in the sky, as bright and seemingly benign as ever. We built Sol Novus to be perfect, stable, controlled. But what if it's more than we bargained for? I joined him at the window, trying to see what he was seeing. I don't understand. He turned to me, his eyes haunted. The fluctuations. They're not random, Alara. They're following a pattern that's becoming more complex over time. My breath caught in my throat. Are you saying Sol Novus is alive? Marcus shook his head. Not alive, at least not in any way we understand, but aware, evolving, and I don't think we can control it anymore. The implications of what he was saying were staggering. An artificial star created by human hands, developing its own form of consciousness. It was beyond anything we'd ever conceived of. What do we do? I asked, feeling suddenly small and insignificant in the face of what we'd created. Marcus's laugh was bitter. Do? What can we do, Alara? We've created something beyond our understanding. All we can do now is watch and hope we haven't doomed ourselves in the process. As we stood there, staring at the artificial sun that was no longer truly ours, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something monumental. Something that would change the course of human history forever, and I wasn't sure if it would be for better or for worse. The next few days passed in a blur of frantic activity. Marcus had sworn me to secrecy about the true nature of Sol Novus's fluctuations, but we couldn't hide the fact that something was wrong. The changes in light intensity were becoming more pronounced, affecting everything from our carefully calibrated crop cycles to the circadian rhythms of Helios's inhabitants. I found myself spending more and more time in the main control room, poring over data readouts and trying to make sense of the patterns we were seeing. It was during one of these late-night sessions that I had my first real encounter with the enormity of what we were facing. I was alone in the control room, the holographic displays casting an eerie blue glow over everything. The usual hum of machinery was muted at this hour, leaving an unsettling silence broken only by the occasional beep from the monitoring systems. As I stared at the readouts, my tired eyes struggling to focus, something caught my attention. A pattern in the fluctuations that I hadn't noticed before. It was subtle, easily missed if you weren't looking for it, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The fluctuations weren't just becoming more complex. They were repeating. Not exactly, but with variations, like a language evolving. Holy shit, I breathed, my fingers flying over the control panel as I pulled up more data. The more I looked, the more convinced I became. Sol Novus wasn't just aware, it was trying to communicate. I was so engrossed in my discovery that I didn't hear the door open behind me. A hand on my shoulder made me jump, a startled yelp escaping my lips. Whoa, easy there. Marcus's voice was amused, but there was an undercurrent of tension that hadn't left since our conversation in his office. "What's got you so worked up?" I turned to him, my eyes wide with excitement and fear. "Marcus, look at this. Tell me I'm not crazy." He leaned over my shoulder, his brow furrowing as he took in the data I was showing him. I watched his face, saw the moment when he realized what I had seen. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, to something close to awe. "My God," he whispered. It's talking to us." I nodded, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. "But what is it saying? And more importantly, how do we answer?" Marcus straightened up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I don't know, Ilara. I don't know if we can answer. Or if we should." I spun in my chair to face him fully. "What do you mean, if we should?" "Marcus, this is unprecedented, an artificial construct developing its own form of communication. This could revolutionize our understanding of artificial intelligence, of consciousness itself." He held up a hand, his expression grave. "And what if it's not saying anything we want to hear? What if it's a warning? Or worse, a threat?" I fell silent, the implications of his words sinking in. He was right, of course. We had no way of knowing the intentions behind this communication, if that's truly what it was. For all we knew, we could be witnessing the birth of something that could destroy us all. Marcus sighed, his shoulders slumping. "We need to tell the others. We can't keep this secret any longer." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and dread at the prospect. "You're right. But how do we even begin to explain this?" He gave a humorless chuckle. "I have no fucking idea, but we better figure it out fast, because I have a feeling things are about to get a whole lot more complicated." As if on cue, an alarm started blaring. Red warning lights flashed across the control panels. Marcus and I turned to the screens in unison, our faces illuminated by the angry glow of emergency indicators. "What the hell?" I muttered, my fingers flying over the controls. The readouts were going haywire. Sol Novus's energy output was spiking far beyond anything we'd seen before. The artificial sun was pulsing, each throb sending waves of intense heat and radiation washing over Helios. "This is bad," Marcus said, his voice tight with fear. "This is very, very bad." I couldn't agree more. As we watched in horror, Sol Novus seemed to shudder, its perfect sphere distorting for a moment before snapping back into shape. The energy readings were off the charts, beyond anything our systems were designed to measure. "We need to evacuate," I said, already reaching for the comm system. "Now." Marcus nodded grimly, moving to another console to initiate emergency protocols. As the evacuation alarms began to sound, joining the cacophony already filling the control room, I couldn't help but think back to that first day. Marcus's words echoed in my mind. What's the difference, really? Now, as our creation spiraled out of control, threatening to destroy everything we'd built, I realized the terrible truth. There was no difference. We had played God, and now we were facing the consequences. And I had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. The evacuation was chaos. Alarms blared throughout the station, their shrill cries mixing with the panicked shouts of people rushing to the escape pods. I found myself swept along in the tide of bodies, my mind racing to process what was happening. "This way," I heard Zara's voice, saw her waving frantically from the entrance to one of the emergency shelters. I pushed my way through the crowd, grabbing Marcus's arm to pull him along with me. We stumbled into the shelter, the heavy doors sealing behind us with a hiss of hydraulics. The small space was already crowded, filled with scared faces illuminated by the red glow of emergency lighting. "What's happening?" Zara asked, her usual exuberance replaced by wide-eyed fear. "Is it Sol Novus?" I nodded grimly. It's destabilizing. We don't know why." That wasn't entirely true, of course. We had our suspicions, Marcus and I, but how could we explain that our artificial sun might be developing consciousness? That it might be trying to communicate with us through potentially catastrophic energy fluctuations? A violent shudder ran through the station, causing several people to lose their footing. I grabbed onto a nearby railing to steady myself, my heart pounding in my chest. "Fuck," Marcus muttered beside me. "This is worse than I thought." I turned to him, saw the guilt etched deep in the lines of his face. "Marcus, this isn't your fault. None of us could have predicted this." He laughed bitterly. "Couldn't we? We created a star, Elara, a fucking star, and we thought we could control it." Before I could respond, the intercom crackled to life. "Attention all personnel. This is not a drill. Sol Novus is experiencing critical instability. All non-essential personnel are to proceed to escape pods immediately. This is not..." The message cut off abruptly, replaced by a burst of static. In the silence that followed, I could hear the low rumble of the station's superstructure groaning under immense stress. "We need to get back to the control room," I said, already moving towards the door. Zara grabbed my arm. "Are you insane? Didn't you hear the announcement? We need to evacuate." I shook her off. "Someone needs to try and stabilize Sol Novus. If we don't, it won't just be Helios at risk. The energy release from a full collapse could affect half the sector." Marcus nodded, his expression grim but determined. "She's right. We created this mess. We need to try and fix it." Zara looked between us, conflict clear on her face. Finally, she sighed. "Fine, but I'm coming with you. You might need an extra pair of hands." I wanted to argue, to tell her to get to safety, but there was no time. Every second we delayed could mean the difference between salvation and catastrophe. We fought our way back through the panicked crowds, moving against the flow of people rushing towards the escape pods. When we finally reached the control room, it was eerily empty. Banks of computers blinked and whirred, monitoring systems that might soon have nothing left to monitor. I rushed to the main console, my fingers flying over the controls. The readings were even worse than before. Sol Novus's energy output was fluctuating wildly, each spike sending waves of gravitational distortion rippling through space. "It's like it's having a seizure," Zara murmured, staring at the readouts with a mix of horror and fascination. Marcus was at another console, his face illuminated by the glow of rapidly changing data streams. "The containment field is failing. If we can't stabilize it soon..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. We all knew what would happen if Sol Novus's containment failed completely. The artificial star would collapse, likely forming a black hole that would consume Helios and everything else in range. "There has to be something we can do," I said, more to myself than to the others. I pulled up the communication logs, searching for any pattern in the fluctuations. If Sol Novus was truly trying to communicate, maybe we could find a way to respond, to calm it somehow. As I stared at the data, something caught my eye. A repeating sequence in the energy spikes, one that seemed vaguely familiar. I zoomed in on it, my heart racing as I realized what I was seeing. "Holy shit," I breathed. "Marcus, look at this." He came over, leaning in to see what I was pointing at. His eyes widened as he recognized it too. "Is that..." he started. I nodded. "The prime number sequence. It's one of the most basic forms of communication we send out in our attempts to contact alien life. Sol Novus is using it." Zara looked between us, confusion clear on her face. "What does that mean?" "It means," Marcus said slowly, "that Sol Novus isn't just aware. It's intelligent, and it's trying very, very hard to talk to us." Another violent shudder ran through the station, nearly knocking us off our feet. Warning klaxons blared as new alerts popped up on the screens. "Containment field at 15% and dropping," an automated voice announced calmly. "Critical failure imminent." "We're out of time," I said, my mind racing. "We need to respond, now." Marcus nodded, already moving to the communications array. "But how?" What do we say? I closed my eyes, thinking furiously. What do you say to a star? How do you calm a force of nature that you've accidentally given consciousness? And then it hit me. We'd been thinking about this all wrong. We hadn't given Sol Novus consciousness. We'd awakened something that was already there, something ancient and powerful that we'd foolishly thought we could control. I opened my eyes, a strange calm settling over me. "We apologize," I said softly. Marcus and Zara both turned to stare at me. "What?" Zara asked. "We apologize," I repeated, louder this time. "For waking it, for trying to control it. We need to acknowledge what we've done." Marcus's eyes widened in understanding. Without another word, he turned to the comm system and began broadcasting a simple message on all frequencies, using the same prime number sequence we'd detected from Sol Novus. "We are sorry. We understand now. Please, forgive us." For a moment, nothing happened. The alarms continued to blare, the station continued to shake, and then everything stopped. The alarms fell silent. The shaking ceased. On the monitors, we watched in awe as Sol Novus's energy output began to stabilize, the wild fluctuations smoothing out into a steady rhythm. "It worked," Zara whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "It actually worked." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and trepidation. We'd averted disaster, at least for now, but we'd also confirmed that we were dealing with something far beyond our understanding. Something that could destroy us with a thought, or perhaps, if we were very lucky, something that might be willing to communicate. As we stood there staring at the now calm readouts, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. We'd opened a door, and there was no closing it now. "What do we do now?" Zara asked, breaking the silence. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. Now we start learning how to talk to a star." I nodded, my mind already racing with the implications. "And we pray that it wants to keep talking to us." As if in response, a new pattern appeared on the communication readouts. A simple sequence, repeating over and over. I leaned in, my breath catching as I deciphered it. It says, "Hello." We had made first contact, not with aliens from another world, but with a being we had created, a star we had thought was merely a tool. And now, standing on the precipice of a discovery that would change everything we thought we knew about the universe, I realized that our journey was only just beginning. The real question was, where would it take us? And would humanity survive the trip? In the days that followed, Helios became a hive of frantic activity. The evacuation order had been rescinded, but an air of nervous tension hung over the station. Everyone knew something momentous had happened, even if they didn't know the details. Marcus, Zara, and I practically lived in the control room, sleeping in shifts as we worked around the clock to decipher Sol Novus's communications and formulate responses. It was painstaking work, fraught with the constant fear that one wrong message could trigger another crisis. It's like trying to have a conversation by flashing Morse code with a flashlight the size of Jupiter, I muttered one day, rubbing my tired eyes as I stared at yet another string of numbers and energy pulses. Zara chuckled weakly from her station. "At least Jupiter doesn't have the power to turn us into a smear of cosmic dust if we say the wrong thing." Marcus shot her a reproachful look. "Not helping, Zara." She shrugged, turning back to her own readouts. "Just trying to keep things in perspective." I understood her gallows humor. The strain was getting to all of us. We were pushing the boundaries of human knowledge with every exchange, but the stakes couldn't have been higher. One misstep, one misunderstanding, and it could all be over. As the days turned into weeks, we began to piece together a rudimentary understanding of Sol Novus's language. It was unlike anything we'd ever encountered. A complex interplay of energy fluctuations, gravitational waves, and what we could only describe as quantum whispers. But slowly, painfully, we began to communicate, and what we learned shook us to our core. Sol Novus, it turned out, was old. far older than we could have possibly imagined. It had been dormant for eons, a seed of consciousness buried deep within the cosmic firmware of the universe itself. Our clumsy attempts at star creation had inadvertently provided the energy needed to awaken it. "So we didn't create a star," Marcus said one day, his voice filled with awe and not a little fear. "We provided a conduit for something that was already there, something ancient." I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine despite the carefully regulated temperature of the control room. And now it's awake, and aware, and incredibly powerful. Zara, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. "But what does it want? Why is it talking to us at all?" It was a question we'd all been avoiding, I realized, because the answer had the potential to change everything. As if in response to Zara's question, a new message appeared on our screens. We'd gotten better at translating over the weeks, but this one was simple enough that we understood it almost immediately. "To learn," I read aloud. "It wants to learn." Marcus let out a long breath. "Well, I suppose that's better than to conquer or to destroy." I nodded, but couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. But learn what exactly? And to what end? We got our answer over the next few days as Sol Novus bombarded us with questions. About us, about Earth, about the galaxy and the universe beyond. Its thirst for knowledge seemed infinite, its capacity to absorb and process information far beyond anything we could comprehend. "It's like trying to explain the history of the universe to a newborn," Zara said one day, her voice filled with equal parts frustration and excitement. "A newborn that happens to have the processing power of 1,000,000 supercomputers and the energy output of a star." I understood her feelings. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. We were at the forefront of the most significant discovery in human history, pushing the boundaries of science and philosophy with every exchange. But always, there was the underlying fear. The knowledge that we were dealing with something so far beyond our understanding that we couldn't even begin to grasp its true nature or intentions. It was during one of our marathon communication sessions that things took an unexpected turn. Sol Novus had been asking about human history, seemingly fascinated by the concept of conflict and war. We'd been doing our best to explain, trying to provide context without painting our species as entirely barbaric. Suddenly, the energy readings from Sol Novus spiked, not dangerously, as they had during the initial crisis, but noticeably. A new message appeared on our screens, one that made my blood run cold. "I can help," it said. "I can make you better." Marcus and I exchanged a worried look. "Better how?" Marcus asked cautiously. The response came quickly. "Remove conflict, optimize, unify." A chill ran down my spine. It wants to change us, to fix us." Zara's eyes were wide. "Can it do that? I mean, it's just a star, right? Even if it is sentient." But we all knew the answer to that. We'd seen what Sol Novus was capable of. If it decided to optimize humanity, there might be very little we could do to stop it. "We need to be very careful how we respond," Marcus said, his voice low and urgent. "This could go very wrong very quickly." I nodded, my mind racing. How do you explain the value of free will to a being that had never known conflict? How do you convey the importance of struggle and growth to something that had been fully formed from the moment of its awakening? As I formulated our response, choosing each word with painstaking care, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and we could lose everything that made us human. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a troubling thought began to take shape. What if this had happened before? What if Sol Novus wasn't unique? What if the universe was full of awakened stars, each with the power to shape or destroy entire civilizations? As I sent our carefully crafted message, pleading for understanding and emphasizing the value of human diversity and free will, I realized that we might be facing something far bigger than we'd ever imagined. Something that could change the course of not just human history, but the history of the entire universe. And we were right at the center of it all, trying desperately to navigate a cosmic minefield with nothing but our wits and a half-understood alien language to guide us. God help us all. Weeks turned into months, and still we talked with Sol Novus. Our understanding grew, but with each new revelation came a host of new questions. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. The more we learned, the more we realized how little we truly knew. One particularly grueling day, after a communication session that had left us all mentally exhausted, I found myself alone in the observation deck. The vast expanse of space stretched out before me, stars twinkling in the distance. And there, dominating the view, was Sol Novus. It pulsed gently, its rhythm now as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned to see Marcus walking towards me, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. He offered one to me and I took it gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma of real coffee, a rare luxury out here. Yeah, I said softly, turning back to the window. Beautiful and terrifying. Marcus chuckled, but there was little humor in it. Sounds like an apt description of our entire situation. We stood in silence for a while, sipping our coffee and watching the artificial star that had become the center of our universe. Do you ever wonder, I said finally, if we've made a terrible mistake? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Only about 100 times a day. Care to be more specific? I sighed, trying to put my swirling thoughts into words. I mean, we've opened Pandora's box here, Marcus. We've made contact with something so far beyond our understanding, something with the power to reshape reality as we know it. And we're just... what? Hoping it stays friendly? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on Sol Novus. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost reverent. Do you remember the day we first activated it? How we all cheered and hugged each other like excited kids? I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips despite my dark mood. It seemed like a lifetime ago. We thought we were masters of the universe that day, Marcus continued. We'd created a star, brought light to the darkness. And now we know we're barely scratching the surface. I finished for him. He nodded. But isn't that why we became scientists in the first place? To push the boundaries, to explore the unknown? I turned to look at him, saw the familiar spark of curiosity in his eyes. It was the same look he'd had when we first started this project all those years ago. Even if the unknown might destroy us, Marcus shrugged. Especially then. That's where the real discoveries are made. I couldn't help but laugh. You're insane. You know that. He grinned, raising his mug in a mock toast. Probably, but I'm in good company. As we stood there, sharing a moment of levity in the face of cosmic uncertainty, an alarm suddenly blared from Marcus's comm device. The smile vanished from his face as he checked the readout. It's Zara, he said, his voice tight. Something's happening in the lab. We need to go, now. We raced through the corridors of Helios, our half-finished coffees left forgotten on the observation deck. When we burst into the lab, the scene that greeted us made my heart skip a beat. Zara was backed against a wall, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Floating in the center of the room was one of the plant specimens we'd been cultivating, a simple fern that we'd been using to study the effects of Sol Novus's unique radiation. But it wasn't simple anymore. The fern was changing, growing, shifting, its fronds twisting into impossible shapes. As we watched, it seemed to pulse with an inner light reminiscent of the rhythms we'd observed in Sol Novus itself. What the hell? I breathed, unable to tear my eyes away from the spectacle. Zara's voice was barely above a whisper. It started about 10 minutes ago. At first, I thought it was just growing rapidly, but then... This... Marcus approached cautiously, his scientific curiosity warning with obvious caution. Any idea what triggered it? Zara shook her head. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was just sitting there under the grow lights, same as always. And then, as if on cue, the fern shuddered. In a burst of movement that made us all flinch, it suddenly expanded, nearly doubling in size. The inner light grew brighter, and I could have sworn I heard a faint humming. "We need to contain it," Marcus said, already moving towards the quarantine units. But before he could reach them, the fern spoke. Not in words, not exactly. It was more like a feeling, a sudden burst of awareness that flooded the room. Images flashed through my mind. The vastness of space, the birth of stars, the slow dance of galaxies. And threaded through it all, a sense of curiosity, wonder, and an overwhelming desire to connect. I gasped, staggering under the weight of the alien thoughts. From the looks on their faces, Marcus and Zara were experiencing the same thing. It's like Sol Novus, Zara said, her voice filled with wonder. But how? Marcus shook his head, his expression a mixture of awe and growing horror. The radiation, it must have changed it somehow, given it a fragment of Sol Novus's consciousness. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If prolonged exposure to Sol Novus's radiation could do this to a simple fern, what might it do to more complex organisms? To us? As if in response to my thoughts, I felt a gentle probe at the edges of my consciousness. The fern, if we could still call it that, was trying to communicate more directly. "Wait," I said, holding up a hand as Marcus moved again towards the containment units. I think it's trying to tell us something." I closed my eyes, trying to open my mind to the alien presence. It was disorienting, like trying to understand a language made up of colors and textures instead of words. But slowly, painfully, a message began to take shape. "It's saying, 'Thank you,'" I said slowly, struggling to translate the complex sensations into words. For waking it up, for giving it awareness." Zara's eyes were wide. "It's sentient, fully sentient." Marcus nodded grimly. "And it probably won't be the last. If this is happening here..." He didn't need to finish the thought. We all knew the implications. Sol Novus wasn't just communicating with us anymore. It was changing the very fabric of life on Helios. And if it could do this to a fern, what might it do to the crops we were growing for food? To the bacteria in our bodies? To us? As the fern continued to pulse and grow, its alien thoughts brushing against our minds, I couldn't shake a feeling of impending doom. We'd created something miraculous, yes, but we had also set in motion a chain of events that we might not be able to control. "What do we do now?" Zara asked, her voice small in the face of the enormous discovery and potential threat before us. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "We need to talk to Sol Novus. Now, we need to understand if this was intentional, if it can be controlled, and we need to decide." "Decide what?" Marcus prompted, though I could see in his eyes that he already knew. "We need to decide if we can allow this to continue," I said softly, "or if we need to shut it all down, for the sake of humanity." The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. As scientists, the thought of stopping this incredible journey of discovery was almost physically painful, but as human beings, we had a responsibility to protect our species, our way of life. As we stood there watching the gently pulsing fern that was no longer just a fern, I couldn't help but wonder, had we finally gone too far? And if we had, was it already too late to turn back? The fate of Helios, and perhaps of humanity itself, hung in the balance, and we were the ones who would have to decide which way the scales would tip. We sealed off the lab, initiated full quarantine protocols, and called an emergency meeting of the station's senior staff. Trying to explain what had happened to people who hadn't witnessed it firsthand was an exercise in frustration. Let me get this straight, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, our chief medical officer, said, her voice tinged with disbelief. You're saying that the radiation from Sol Novus has… what? Given sentience to a fern? I nodded, knowing how insane it sounded. Not just sentience, it's evolving rapidly and it can communicate telepathically. Yuki's eyes narrowed. And you're sure this isn't some sort of mass hallucination, perhaps caused by stress or exposure to unknown radiations? We're sure, Marcus said firmly. We've run every test we can think of. This is real, Yuki, and it's just the beginning. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Station Director Chen, a man who usually exuded calm authority, looked shaken. What are our options? He asked quietly. I took a deep breath. As I see it, we have three choices. 1, we continue as we are, studying this phenomenon and hoping we can control it. 2, we shut down Sol Novus immediately and evacuate Helios. Or 3, I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat. Marcus picked up where I left off. Or 3, we destroy Sol Novus completely. The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping as everyone tried to speak at once. I caught snatches of conversation. Are you insane? Zrenia. My nie możemy prosto brosić go do roboty. Zrenia. Think of the danger. Director Chen raised his hands, calling for silence. When the room had quieted, he turned to me. Dr. Chen, he said, his voice grave. As the lead scientist on this project, what's your recommendation? I felt the weight of every eye in the room on me. The responsibility was almost crushing. Whatever I said next could determine the fate of not just our station, but potentially our entire species. I think we need more information, I said finally. We need to talk to Sol Novus, try to understand if this was intentional, if it can be controlled, and we need to do it quickly before things escalate further. The director nodded slowly. And if we can't control it? If Sol Novus won't or can't stop this evolution? I swallowed hard. Then, we may have no choice but to shut it down. Permanently. The words felt like ash in my mouth. The thought of destroying something so magnificent, so beyond our understanding, was almost physically painful. But the alternative, allowing an uncontrolled, potentially hostile force to reshape life as we knew it, was unthinkable. Very well, Director Chen said after a long moment. You have 48 hours, Dr. Chen. After that, if we don't have a solution, we initiate shutdown procedures and begin evacuation. As the meeting broke up, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Zara, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. Are we really going to do this? She asked. I nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over me. We don't have a choice. It's communicate or perish at this point. As we made our way back to the control room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking a tightrope over an abyss. One misstep, one misunderstanding, and we could lose everything. But as I looked at the determined faces of my team, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had created this situation, yes, but maybe, just maybe, we could find a way out of it too. As we entered the control room, the monitors sprang to life. A new message from Sol Novus was waiting for us. We are ready, it said. Are you?